read the script real quick. So
Sure, sure.
so okay.
Yeah,
So it's being recorded right now. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Laiel, an ambassador part of Troop 10080. I appreciate the time you've taken to support my Gold Award and being able to join this meeting today. Please be advised the meeting will be recorded for social media and data collection purposes. This Zoom will be part of a series of Zoom sessions with different individuals of the community. So the individual I have here today is Mr. Zembuch. Hello, Mr. Zembuch. How are
hi,
you?
how are you? Good, good, good.
I'm great. Um, I'm so excited that, you've taken the time out of your day to come join me and, teach everyone a little bit about what you know about ASL and the DHH community. And if
Sure.
you'd like to introduce yourself in any way with any introduction, you can go ahead and do so now.
Sure. My name is Jason Zembuch Young, and I am a high school theater director. I've been teaching now for this will be my 28th year that I'm going into, which is insane to me. I was the theater director at South Plantation High School for 19 years, and I have been the founding theater director at Dr. Joaquin Garcia High School here in Palm Beach County for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I taught English as well as middle school. And that's a little bit about me. My bachelor's degree is in English education with an emphasis in secondary education, and my master's degree is in directing for the stage.
Thank you so much for that introduction. You're very well-rounded and well-versed, so I thank you.
Yep,
Um, so I'm going to ask you a few questions that people have been wondering.
sure.
My first question would be, these will be questions relating to you directing at South Plantation High School. So the first
Mhm.
question I'd like to ask is, why did you decide to incorporate ASL into South Plantation's productions?
Okay, so when I moved to South, before I even started my first day, I had attended a freshman orientation at South Plantation. And it was something that was being hosted and put on by the Student Government Association, and they were doing like skits about different school rules and dress code and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I had never really been exposed to ASL or anybody at all. I'd never even been around somebody who was deaf. And I was enamored in watching the educational interpreters interpret for the audience. I was blown away at how, in watching an interpreter switch from one character to another character, how seamless it was, and the quality of acting that was actually going on in there. There was this drastic shift when they were interpreting somebody playing a character that was supposed to be sullen or sully, the physicalization of the whole thing. When they were interpreting a character that was supposed to be upset about something or mad or happy or whatever, they just drastically changed their entire demeanor, their physical expression, and everything like that. So really, when I saw this, I had thought to myself, what an amazing tool to use with my actors. The idea of physical expression. Beginning actors, a lot of times what they struggle with is they memorize their lines, but then there's this disconnect about, what do I do with my hands? I'm feeling so awkward standing here in front of a group of people and I'm saying my lines, but I don't know what to do. And the use of American Sign Language just gave actors something to do with their hands. And then from there, so it started out really truly as an experiment. Um, and what then happened is I noticed that simply by using American Sign Language as a teaching tool for acting, um, people started showing up. I had deaf members of the student population sign up to take my class. I had interpreters that were side by side with the deaf students in my classes. And simply by, I guess, incorporating representation, we started seeing a genuine interest from the deaf community in being involved in a theater program that prior to that really wasn't as accessible to them. You know, um, so what started out as an experiment with my uh, hearing actors became something that I just naturally started to incorporate because I had deaf students start to show up. They showed up in auditions. They showed up in my classes. And so my first 2 years, I slowly kind of started to incorporate um, theater for the deaf. My very first production at South, in which I had no idea of what I was doing. I had a deaf actor who had auditioned, and actually I had two, and I cast them in the show, and their educational interpreters shadowed them on stage, and so we made the show accessible to the deaf actor that was part of the production. But then what I started noticing is that deaf audience members started showing up. And while the interpreter was there side by side with the deaf actor, when the deaf actor was on stage, if there was a deaf audience member, they weren't able to understand anything else that was going on, because unless the interpreter was out on stage with that deaf actor, there was no access. So from there, I started kind of learning a lot more about deaf culture, learning a lot more about what access actually means, and began incorporating theater for the deaf into every production that I incorporated. The following year, we produced the musical Peter Pan, and that was the first time that I had actually directed something in which every single word that was spoken, sung, was interpreted for our deaf audience members. And over the years, I worked with a wonderful group of educational interpreters that really kind of taught me about what I needed to do in order to truly provide equal access. I've always been somebody who believes if somebody shows up and they want to work, I'll put them to work. And so I think that what I learned over my first few years at South was that I now had a responsibility that I didn't even realize that I had. South Plantation High School is the only school in Broward County Public Schools that actually provides access to deaf and hard of hearing education for our deaf and hard of hearing population. It's a specialized program specifically for that. It's been like that for almost 50 years. And so I truly believe that theater should always be something that incorporates and represents the community in which it resides. And so the incorporation of American Sign Language into our productions was a natural matriculation of all of that. It's a beautiful thing. Our first production, we actually had people drive in from Georgia because they heard about what we were doing, because they had never had access to a fully produced production in their own hometowns and in their own communities. It was a relative of somebody that had heard about what we were doing, and they came in just to see what we were doing. And I guess it really is one of those kind of things where it's like, if you build it, they will come. And I think that if you provide representation, it opens the doors for many, many more people than what had ever been available before.
Thank you. I learned a lot from what you just said, and I was wondering if there were any other challenges that didn't translate over from your first year to your most recent year that you had at South Plantation.
Oh,
Like,
absolutely. Yeah,
can you,
absolutely.
yeah.
So there's okay, American Sign Language in and of itself is a language in its entirety, right? So just like Spanish, just like Japanese, it has its own grammar, it has its own syntax, it has its own structure. It is a full language in and of itself. I think that when people start thinking of American Sign Language, they really kind of think of English, and it's just put to gesture. So it's like a representation, but it's not. So when you do something like you produce theater, you produce theater in a way that is incorporating American Sign Language, you cannot, and this is something that I learned. So the way we did this was we would do a show, and then I would go up to every deaf person that I could possibly find, and I would ask them questions like, what worked, what didn't work, did you understand everything, where were the gaps? And one of the first things that I remember being told was that it didn't match. So what would happen was our first production that we did like this, we translated it directly into American Sign Language, right? So true ASL. And so what would happen would be just like in Spanish and English. You know, you can say something in Spanish that is this short, you know, but when you're saying it in English, it comes out like this, and vice versa. You can say something in English that is, you know, this short of a paragraph or whatever, but when you translate it into Spanish, it's actually this long, right? And so what would happen would be people would sign American Sign Language and say English, and it would be like the bad, you know, the bad dubs when, you know, old movies, when they would do something, you would watch something like a, a movie that was originally recorded in an Asian dialect or whatever, and then the English subtitles would be something where it would be like, you know,
Yeah.
hello, you
Yeah.
know. And so what was happening for our deaf audience members is they would see some signing, but then it would stop and lips would keep going. So you would sign, and our deaf audience members were wondering what they were missing. You know, what's been left out. So when you produce theater for the deaf, most of the time, if you're doing something where English is being spoken as well as American Sign Language is being used, it has to be more of like a pidgin language where it's not true English and it's not true ASL, but it's kind of a blend between the two so that they kind of line up and they make sense. Theater for the deaf is a loaded term, you know. There is a difference between making theater accessible through the use of American Sign Language versus truly producing theater for the deaf. And I've done both. Theater for the deaf is when you truly incorporate deaf culture into an actual piece of theater. So West Side Story was one in which we layered on top of, and that was the first theater for the deaf a production that I really kind of produced, incorporating culture into it. Because what we did was we layered on top of the, you know, Hispanic culture, Puerto Ricans versus naturalized Americans, and the struggle and the strife between the two. We layered on top of that deaf culture that was Puerto Rican. So the Puerto Ricans were deaf, and the naturalized Americans were hearing, and so that was the first time we incorporated deaf culture. But then a production that I'm extremely proud of directorially was when I produced a piece of theater that was, you know, The Crucible. I had done Arthur Miller's The Crucible, in which the actors, we flipped it. So instead of having actors voice all of their parts and then interpret for our deaf audience members what was happening, we flipped it upside down. So every single character in The Crucible was fully deaf, and I actually had two interpreters that voiced all of the parts that were being signed. So the challenges along the way, to circle back to what you had actually asked, the challenges along the way, one, about how to blend language so that it is as conceptually accurate as possible, because there is an onus and a duty that you have to that, and two, how to truly be truthful in what it is that we are doing, and to be cognizant, and to learn as a director, learning how to work with deaf technicians and actors. Like, so for example, I've had some people that were part of my crew that were fully deaf. A young man by the name of Jesse was a follow spot operator, and as well as part of my build crew. And my follow spot operator, you know, he was completely deaf, so he didn't hear the music, he didn't hear any of the dialogue. All he had to work off of was visual cues. So in a traditional script, when character A says this, character B moves here. But when you're working with somebody that's deaf, they don't hear character A saying that. So you have to go back and build in all of the visual cues to work with your deaf population. So yeah, challenges about how to deal with language and then how to truly make it accessible and be truthful in what it is that you're doing.
Um, with with the students or the staff or like whoever it was that taught you these different things, who would you say was your biggest supporter in translating the productions into ASL when it first came time to do that?
So that's one of the beautiful things about this is
Mm,
I can't necessarily pick one individual, you know.
mhm,
It really was a community kind of an effort. Originally, when I started doing this, I had two ladies that I worked with, Helene Khan and Annie Love, and they were educational interpreters that actually worked side by side with the students that were involved in the program. So they were the most intricately involved, and they were truly invested in everything that they were doing. And neither one of them, especially Helene, had no problems whatsoever putting me in my place and telling me I was just flat out wrong. If they saw something that wasn't working, they would be the first ones to jump up and say, "Hey, listen, man, you need to revisit this." Because again, we all had this genuine buy-in to the fact that what we were doing was something that was worthy and was bigger than any individual. So it really truly was a community effort. But in terms of the people that started it all, Helene Khan and Annie Love side by side with me every single step of the way. They taught me everything that I know about deaf culture. Oh, and again, my former students. So again, like it's hard. Helder was my first young deaf man. Giovanna, who she was part of the theater program. She was actually my deaf um, Maria in West Side Story. She actually, when I had won the Tony, she was the one that did all of the glossing for me for my
oh
acceptance
wow.
speech, and she taught me everything that I know in
Mhm,
terms everything that I signed at the Tonys, and she was so very patient with me.
mhm.
But yeah, it truly has been a community effort.
Okay, I like that
Yeah,
answer, very
thank you.
detailed. um I was wondering, any other times before you had gotten your Tony and you did your speech in ASL, were there any other moments or points in times when you learned ASL or were just taught ASL by like the students or like the staff that helped you?
Yeah, of course. I was teaching deaf students, so of
Mm,
course I learned as much sign language as I possibly could.
mm,
Again, the idea of ASL versus English. When I sign, I am significantly more English than I am ASL,
mm,
because when I am voicing in English and signing exactly what I'm saying, as opposed to like when I would work with actors that would learn glossing, it was much like choreography.
mm,
You have a script that you know exactly what you're going to say, and so you can take and put all of that into ASL. Um, and you could then turn around and learn these gestures to match up with what you're saying. When I was working with my deaf students, it's not like I knew what I was going to say ahead of time and had an opportunity to gloss it and learn exactly. So when
mm,
I sign, it's very English as opposed to ASL. My kids taught me as much as they possibly could, and I ask as many questions as I can and look up as much stuff as I possibly can. And I think that as people, we should naturally try to learn the language of the people that we're working with.
mm,
Like right now, I work with a large Hispanic population. I do not work with anybody who is deaf at this school, and I miss it. But I have a large Spanish speaking population at this school. So I've been working on my Spanish so that I can speak to my Spanish only speaking kids. So that,
Mm.
so yeah, there you go.
Okay. Um, with your new school that you're at, I hope everything's doing great with that. I was wondering, with like you said, you're learning Spanish, and
Mhm.
because you have like predominantly Spanish speakers, if there was a chance that there happened to be like a random abundance of deaf or hard of hearing people, would you then try to incorporate ASL into those productions
Of
or?
course. So
Mhm,
I was asked specifically when I left South if I was going to continue with theater for the deaf.
mhm,
And again, we have a responsibility to the community that we serve. As educators, we have a responsibility to the community that we serve. And as enlightened people, we have a duty to be truthful and honest, and to represent in truthful and honest manners. So
mhm,
if I were to be producing theater for the deaf at Dr. Joaquin Garcia High School when there are no deaf students, it now
mhm,
becomes a gimmick. And
mhm,
now I'm now using a gimmick in order to sell tickets. And that is just wrong on every single solitary level.
mhm,
So at Garcia, we have a little over 50% of our student population identifies as being Hispanic. Um, we have a large population of students that come from Spanish only speaking homes. And we have a a healthy sized student population that is Spanish only speaking themselves. Most of the kids that I work with are bilingual, but a lot of
mhm,
them do come from Spanish only speaking homes. So when we produce our shows, we actually do live, simultaneous Spanish voiceover acting. So I have my production, and if Abuela shows up in order to watch the show and she doesn't speak any English, she can check out a headset in the lobby, and I have a group of anywhere from like 4 to 6 Spanish actors that are doing voiceovers simultaneously on microphones. So just like using American Sign Language, where a deaf audience member can watch the show and look wherever it is that they want. Um, I have my Spanish only speaking audience members are able to put a headset on and watch the show and listen to the acting going on in Spanish while they're watching the show as well. It There's something that always just has rubbed me the wrong way in terms of people that claim to provide access that truly don't make the effort to provide access. When I got to South, again, you had asked about challenges. When I got to South, and it's been so long ago that I didn't even remember this until now. I had to fight a lot with the district to actually provide funding for the educational interpreters after school hours for the kids that were involved in the theater program that were deaf. Um, they wanted to have me do something where it was like the deaf night. So even if you go somewhere at Broward Center for Performing Arts and you see the a tour that comes in and that comes to Broward Center, right? They typically have the one or the two performances that are in which sign language interpreters are available. And what they do is they take those sign language interpreters and they shove them all the way off to the side of the stage. And so, as a deaf audience member that shows up to Broward Center in order to, and again, this is not Broward Center. I'm not faulting Broward Center because they're a roadhouse, but a production,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
In order to watch a production, if I am deaf, I have to choose to either watch the interpreter over here and not see anything that's actually happening on stage, or I can watch the production that's taking place on stage and not hear anything at all that's going on, right?
mhm,
And so, in working with deaf and hard of hearing and in making my shows accessible through American Sign Language, that's why it was important for me to make sure that every single show that I ever produce an audience member that was deaf could walk into the theater, sit down, and watch any production and truly understand everything that's going on and not have to pick whether or not they want to see it or want to hear it. And that's my same mission at Garcia. I want audience members to be able to come sit and watch a show, and not have to read subtitling or choose whether or not to watch it or understand it or anything like that.
I'm just wondering, I love like the headset idea so much, and I'm wondering how did you come up with doing that? Like what made you think to do that?
Again, I don't know. It just makes sense to me. um, you know, it, the question that I had was, how do I have a group of people in front of me. How do I provide as much access to those people as I possibly can? And that
Mhm.
extends to their family members. Um, the thing that I've loved about being an educator, and this is one of the nice things about being a theater educator and not working in the business or being in the profession. Um, I have I have people that walk into the door that I believe would never take that opportunity to walk into a professional setting, you know. Um, so if I've had kids that are 100% completely legally blind and they audition, and so as a theater director, I'm now tasked with, okay, how do I take this blind actor and how do I incorporate them into a production? Because if they want to, if they want to work again, I'll figure out a way to work. Um, I've had kids that are deaf, that are blind, that are on the spectrum. I've had wheelchair bound kids that have been part of productions, and you just look at who you have in front of you, and you figure out how to make it as approachable and accessible as possible. And that was a natural translation, no pun intended, for my students and extended community at Garcia.
Were there any other ideas that you came up with before thinking about using headsets?
For Spanish
Hmm.
access,
Yeah.
um, I mean, so I literally, with my last production, with my musical,
Hmm.
it was a struggle. We almost weren't able to do this because none of my kids that were willing to do voiceover work wanted to sing. And there's a drastically different, like
Hmm.
speaking in Spanish while somebody's speaking in English versus singing an entire song in Spanish, and the way that it matches up, right? Like
Yeah.
again, you can't just translate word for word, especially when music is thrown in.
Hmm.
Because there's a beat and syllables, and you know
Hmm.
sometimes it doesn't work, and so that was just beyond their challenge. So um, we had to use pre-recorded tracks that we had discovered that were the songs already sung in Spanish, that we then dubbed in on top of with the the voice actors, so they would voice all of the spoken dialogue, and then we would play tracks for the Spanish that was sung. Um, so I don't think I answered your question though. Did I have any other ideas in terms of act? Oh, I know where I was going
Yeah.
with that. I had a young man who actually wanted to partner with me in order to provide the live recordings, and he was Hispanic, and he actually was an adult in the community, and a very active advocate for Hispanic education. Actually, there's an organization called the Hispanic Education Foundation, and he was a member of that. And one of the things that he had mentioned to me was, why don't you just do like when you go to an opera, a lot of times you'll see the subtitling of the what's being spoken or sung
Hmm.
on like LED screens or something. And while that was an idea that had been tossed, I rejected that, because again, now you're telling somebody they have to choose to read what's going on or watch what's going
Hmm. Wow, I just I love that so much. Like that's so like genius. Um, Reverting back to sign language at South,
Mhm.
have there been any blind spots in the audience where an audience member has told you that they're unable to see like a certain sign or certain parts during the production?
Absolutely. And that's one of those things that when you had asked about challenges along the way, and I had said that, that one of the challenges that I had was, constantly evolving and discovering, learning as a director of what actually works and what doesn't work. Um, and every single production, I was always getting feedback because I solicited it, like I'm not deaf. That's not my experience. That's not my world. So go to the people that are deaf and ask them what worked and what didn't.
Mhm.
Um, so just like anything else, there's only so far that you can go in terms of teaching students that aren't deaf themselves how to sign what they're signing properly
Mhm.
or with enough expression or with enough clarity. Because again, ASL is a language in and of itself, just like English, where you have people that won't articulate what they're saying and get really very much now. When you have people that are signing, if they're not clear in what they're signing and their hands are all kind of sloppy, to a
Mhm.
deaf person, that looks or sounds inarticulate. It sounds mumbled. It sounds slurred. There's only so far that we can go with that. But as the educator, as the teacher, as the director, like I can only take people so far with that. So my next challenge is how do I always put myself in the shoes of that deaf person to figure out how, even if they don't understand it, they can actually see what's going on. And I've made many, 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 many different errors, right? So, for example, and again, you're familiar with this.
Mhm.
While having somebody voice and sign what they're saying, when I direct a production, some productions everybody says and signs everything that they're saying and singing. That is the least um, effective way to make theater accessible to a deaf person, right? Because when you have somebody standing over here and somebody standing all the way over here, if this person says, hi, hi, how are you? Good. Oh, what's going on? Oh, nothing much. Where are you going tonight? Oh, I'm going to go to the mall. Oh, where did you do that this last weekend? Okay. If we're hearing, I can hear this person say this, and I can hear this person say that. But when I have two people standing on opposite sides of the stage, far stage right, far stage left, if I sign this and this person immediately signs something back, if I'm deaf, I don't know where to look, you know? So if I've
Mhm.
got all of these people on stage and this person signs something and this person signs something, as the deaf person, when this person signs it, how do I know to look over here for the response? You know?
Yeah.
So there becomes this ability of visual cueing, you know? So you have to throw stuff to the other person. Directorially, you take this person and you make sure that they're standing next to each other, either stage right or stage left when they're having a conversation, so that the deaf person isn't looking from here all the way over to here. Because by the time I turn my head, I've missed half of their response. And
Mhm.
if we do something back, like I said, hi, how are you? Good. What's going on? Oh, nothing. Leave me alone. If I'm deaf, by the time I look over for hi, that there, it's like ping pong.
Mhm.
Where do I look?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I've done that. I actually did that for a long time, thinking, oh, access, until somebody
Mhm.
pointed that out to me, like, I don't know, maybe even 4 or 5 years in. And they're like, I know it looks cool, but it really doesn't help us,
Mhm.
you know?
Wow. Okay. So I don't know, because I was just thinking, like, has, like, a deaf person not ever told you that it's kind of hard to focus on the interpreter and the person, like, what they're saying? Because are they looking at hands and what the person is saying at the same time, or is that when they're, like, ping-ponging, like, who's doing, like what? Like, what do
Well, the answer is yes, right? Because
mm,
when you are looking at somebody who is deaf
mhm,
that is communicating with American Sign Language, a lot of times there is lipping that takes place. It does not look like what lipping is from somebody who is hearing. It's a unique kind of um, gesturing, but the face, I mean, hands alone are not what communicate. It's all about facial expressions. And
mhm,
so when somebody is deaf and they're communicating with somebody else, they're looking at upper body, you know, from where somebody's hands are going, but also at the face. I mean, like, um, again, if you're talking about the sign for like hungry, right? So if you're hungry and it goes down to your stomach, and then if you're like gross and it's up here at the chest, when somebody's signing fast, how do I
mhm,
know? Oh, because again, it just like English,
mhm,
or Spanish. When somebody is speaking Spanish to me, if they speak very slowly, each word, most of the time, I can understand what they said.
mhm,
However, it becomes very confusing to me when it's and it all goes together. American
mhm,
Sign Language is the same way. Like I know enough rudimentary sign to where if somebody is signing very slowly, I can understand a lot the general context. But when it goes fast, I'm like, so how do you know if they're happy, if they're sad, if they're angry, or whatever? Facial expressions, you know.
mhm.
So it's a combination of both. Not just what you're doing with your fingers and your hands, but what are you doing with your face? What are you doing with your lips? It's a total package.
Okay. Do you find that when it's time to come for students to come and audition and they're the students that have no idea or they've never been taught ASL or they don't know anything about ASL, do you feel when the time comes, like, for those students to do it, that they kinda, like, shy away from it or they kinda just, like, "No, like, I'm not doing this," because they're, like, scared or timid, or ha have you had any students that are like that?
I think at the beginning I did.
Mhm,
I think at the beginning people didn't get it. I will say that there's a huge difference between having deaf students that are directly involved in a production
mhm,
versus producing productions in which there's nobody actually deaf involved in there. I think that students have a buy-in when they are working side by side with somebody that is actually deaf, and sees that this is something that is real rather than it being something that is artificial. Um, I think that there is an ownership and an onus that is heightened when you actually have deaf people involved. Um, and so when you have that, I think that the buy in from the general student population is greater. Um, I think that more, and this is one of the things that I love about working with teenagers. Um, most of the time, the kids that I work with, they buy what it is that I'm selling. You know, they come in, I say this is what it's going to be like, and if it's not for them, they fail right away.
mhm,
But if it is for them, they typically throw themselves in 100%. General public, that was where I struggled for a minute. Um, and I think that every year I would have freshmen that would come into the program and their parents would come. And I remember like parents always talking about how the first production that they see in which American Sign Language was incorporated, they felt overloaded, like sensory overload. I don't know where to look. It looks so chaotic. And then by the time they watch a couple productions, it becomes par for the course. It just becomes this natural extension of the actor. I think that any time that we as people are are faced with something that is new and different, for whatever reason, our knee-jerk reaction is to resist it, you know? Um, and then when we let go and kind of just allow it to wash over us, I think that we can kind of um, have movement forward. And it's the same thing with working with um, American Sign Language in terms of a production. I think that new kids walk in and they're like, I don't know what to do. I feel very overwhelmed. And then once they see everybody else around them and they realize that everybody is kind of in the same boat, then I think that they kind of relax and embrace it. Um, South Plantation High School is known now internationally, actually, is known specifically for producing theater for the deaf. The work that we did when I was there and we were working on West Side Story, that's actually published in a textbook in Japan, specifically on theater for the deaf and how the high school program is there. I mean, you take 2 seconds and look up South Plantation High School and look up drama, and that's what comes up. So I think that people know what they're getting into when they walk into. And my hope is that even though I'm no longer there, that is what South continues to be known for. Because again, it only makes sense. It is the only school in Broward County Public Schools, which is the sixth largest school district in the entire United States. It is the only school that offers programming to deaf and hard of hearing students in all of Broward County Public Schools. So why would it not be something that is incorporated into every program, including
Mhm.
the theater program?
Mhm. Um, sorry.
You're good.
Um, sorry. Did you find that did you find that incorporating ASL into the productions brought in like a larger crowd, or did it stay like about the same?
Um, that's a hard question to answer
Mm-hmm.
because it's not like I worked for years at South and had an audience base that changed when I started incorporating American Sign Language. I
Mm-hmm.
walked in the door, and my first production, I kind of started with stuff. Um, and by the time my second year was there, my third show, I was producing full on productions. So was it because of American Sign Language that brought people in? I don't necessarily think that that would be a primary cause. I think that it was because we were producing excellence in the high school setting in theater, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Um, Again, like any demographic and any, uh, at Garcia, if I'm producing shows in and I'm using simultaneous Spanish translations, if the shows are crap, nobody's going to come, regardless of whether or not it's
Mm-hmm.
being translated.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I don't necessarily think that that there was a causal link between audience size.
Mm-hmm.
One, audience size is directly tied to quality of work that you're doing. Nobody wants to come and sit through a high school show that is boring and that is just poorly produced with low production values.
Mm-hmm.
Two, the students involved in the program, they're the ones that truly, truly make the program. You know, if the students don't jump in and and get excited about what they're producing, then nobody's going to want to show up. It's like if you go buy a car and you walk onto the car lot and somebody's like, "You want to buy a car?" You want a salesperson that's excited about the car that they're showing you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what gets audiences in, and and basic marketing and publicity.
Mm-hmm. Um, were there like different ways, well, other than a poster, were there other ways that you advertised your productions to the DHH community?
Oh, absolutely. First off, every single school got notified via emails about the productions that we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have there's an organization called DPHH, which is Deaf Professionals something something, that we would actually market our productions to. Um, I made sure that all of the interpreters were out there because, again, interpreters are tapped into the community at large. Broward Community College, or Broward College now, I guess, they have an ASL program. So we marketed it at Broward College all the time. They used to bring groups of students, like the head of the interpreting the ASL interpreting program at Broward College would make it mandatory that her students come and attend the productions. You just gotta you gotta get the word out into the community.
Mm-hmm.
But
I
again,
will
if
definitely,
it's not done well, people aren't going to go.
yeah. Thank you for those. I will definitely be stealing those for this upcoming year. Um, Probably one of the last few questions that I'll ask. Um, Sorry, I lost it. Um, oh, as someone who isn't fluent, so most or a good amount of your students were deaf or had somewhat experience with ASL, but for the students that weren't like familiar or comfortable with ASL, how would you, you know, bring them out of their comfort zone? Like, were there like warm-ups that you did or like character building activities or things that like bonded the actors together to help them, you know?
Well, and let me make sure that I clarify. When I had okay, a large number of deaf students involved in a production would have been two or three out of 60, 70 kids. You know,
Oh.
I typically would have one or two kids involved. And there's a lot of factors in terms of why our deaf students at South Plantation High School aren't as involved. And a lot of it has to do with money and
Mm-hmm.
transportation. And that's a whole other thing, right? Because within the deaf community, there are people that are part of a deaf world in which deaf culture is embraced, and then you have people that are deaf but aren't necessarily tied into a world or a family or a community that embraces deafness as being something other than a disorder, you know.
Mm-hmm.
um, And so there's a lot that goes into that. But one of the reasons that I truly believe that we at South had a teetering out of deaf involvement was because of literally transportation and money. Um, so, because sadly, a lot of those deaf families that embrace deaf culture pull their kids out of public schools and put them into schools like Florida School for the Deaf, right? Because their needs are not being met in a mainstream education. And that, there's a whole lot that goes into that. So,
Mm-hmm.
back to the question at hand in terms of how do you make somebody comfortable with it? Um, everybody is an individual person, and so you have to kind of meet people with where they're at. I am not a coddling person. I'm not the let me put my arm around you and it's okay, honey. I'm a jump 2 feet into the pool and just suck it up and let's go. You've got people that when they're getting into the swimming pool or they go to the beach, they have to go like little toe, ooh, wait until my ankle warms up. And then you have other people that are just like, dive in, you'll get used to it. I'm a dive in, you'll get used to it person. Um, One of the biggest things that I always had to make sure that I worked with my actors, because remember, I wasn't teaching American Sign Language.
Hmm.
I was not teaching a language, you know. Um, I was choreographing a show so that American Sign Language was incorporated into the production. So you don't have to know that um, that this means fine. All you had to do was that when you said the word fine, you did this, right? So just like in choreography for dance, um, you don't have to know what sachet is and you don't have to know all of the technical terms for every single dance step that you're doing in choreography. You need to know
Hmm.
5, 6, 7, 8, left, right, jump, and down. You know, uh, and so American Sign Language, in terms of theatrical production and my actors, it was the same way. You don't need
Hmm.
to know that this means fine. You don't need to know that this means seven. You just need to know that when you say 7, 8, 10, that this is what your hand does.
Hmm.
And I think that once people stopped fighting the idea of, I don't know American Sign Language, how am I going to do this while I'm speaking English? And they let go of that. And they realize you don't need to know American Sign Language. You just need to go 7. That's all you
Yeah,
got
yeah.
to do, right?
Hmm.
And then one of the beautiful things is that over the course of time, the more you do that, the more you learn American Sign Language. And
Yeah.
it's beautiful because I've had several kids leave my theater program that walked in not knowing anything at all about American Sign Language and have gone into professional worlds in which they work with deaf and hard of hearing populations, in which they become certified interpreters because they just fell in love with the language and with the culture. Like
Hmm.
several. In fact, I have a young lady that I just heard from the other day who sat and is in the process of finishing her national certification, um, because and
Oh,
she was one of my kids that she learned American Sign Language walking into the theater program. And by the time she was in her senior year, she was one of the folks that was doing all of the glossing for me. She went off because she wanted to go into musical theater. And she did that for a little while. And then she discovered that's not her thing. And now she's an interpreter, which
hmm.
is cool, which is cool.
That was all the questions that I had, but you answered that beautifully. That was, gonna be one of the last questions that I was gonna ask. Have any of your former students reached out to you? And you answered that. So thank you.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
did, yeah. But that's all I have for you today. So that was all the questions that I had.
All
Thank you
right.
so, so much, Mr. Zembuch, for taking your time to join this meeting and answer the questions. I also wanted to say thank you because you are kind of what inspired me to do my Gold Award and make it about ASL and bring awareness for the DHH community and teach people sign language and all of that. And I've grown to have a passion for it, and I thank you so, so much. So,
Absolutely. And I love that you're doing this. I love that you are inspired by the work that we've done at South and want to make other people aware of the work that we're doing, but also perhaps spark a couple ideas out there. And
mhm,
maybe some other folks out there will think twice about what does access look like, and
mhm,
why aren't we being as more accessible for anybody and everything,
mhm,
whether it be through language or culture or community or exceptionality or whatever.
Mhm.
So thank you, Leo.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a nice day, Mr. Zembuck,
You
and I
too.
hope to
All right.
talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. Bye bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Um, Thank you all for taking the time to join this informational meeting with Mr. Zembuck and I appreciate you all so much, and I hope you all enjoyed this session and felt it was very informative. And if you haven't already, please follow my Gold Award journey. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And if you don't follow me, I can drop my social medias in the description below. And if there are any further questions, please email me at beyondwords.handsofharmony@gmail.com. Bye bye.